I've always been fascinated by the intricate dance of genes, the silent choreography that shapes our very essence. As a geneticist, I've dedicated my life to unraveling these molecular mysteries. But nothing in my years of study could have prepared me for the day I became the subject of my own research. It started innocuously enough. A routine blood test, part of the annual checkup I had been putting off for months. I remember the sterile smell of the lab, the cool efficiency of the technician as she drew my blood. I even joked about how, as a geneticist, I should be on the other side of the needle. If only I'd known then how prophetic those words would become. When the results came back, they were far from routine. An anomaly in my genetic profile, a mutation so rare that it took several rounds of testing to confirm its presence. At first, I approached it with the detached curiosity of a scientist, eager to explore this new genetic puzzle. But as I delved deeper into the research, the cold reality of what I was facing began to sink in. The mutation was linked to a hereditary disease, one that had likely been lurking in my family's genes for generations, silently passing from parent to child. The prognosis was grim. Progressive neurodegeneration, with symptoms typically manifesting in mid-adulthood. Fatal within a decade of onset. The clinical descriptions were stark, unemotional, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside me. I spent nights poring over medical journals, cross-referencing genetic databases, searching for any shred of information that might offer hope. But with each passing day, the weight of my discovery pressed down on me, suffocating in its implications. This was just about me anymore. If I carried this mutation, there was a high probability that others in my family did too. The realization hit me like a physical blow. How many of my relatives were walking around with this genetic time bomb ticking away inside them, blissfully unaware of the fate that awaited them? And how many had already succumbed to this disease, their deaths perhaps misdiagnosed or written off as an unfortunate twist of fate? I found myself staring at old family photos, scrutinizing the faces of long-dead relatives for any signs of the disease I now knew lurked in our shared DNA. Great Aunt Eliza, who died young of what everyone called a nervous condition. Uncle James, whose trembling hands in his later years had been attributed to too much drink. How many others had there been? Their stories lost to time and medical ignorance. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years studying genetic diseases, priding myself on my ability to maintain professional distance. Now, faced with my own genetic legacy, I felt anything but detached. Fear, anger, and a perverse sense of fascination warred within me. I was both the researcher and the subject, the doctor and the patient. As the initial shock began to wear off, a new determination took its place. I realized that I held a unique position, armed with both scientific knowledge and a personal stake in the outcome. If I could trace this mutation through my family tree, perhaps I could not only understand its origins, but also identify other carriers before it was too late. The task ahead was daunting. My family, like so many others, had scattered over the years. Branches of the family tree had been pruned by time and distance, leaving gaps in our collective history. I knew that filling in those blanks would mean more than just constructing a pedigree chart. It would mean digging up long-buried secrets, reopening old wounds, and possibly delivering life-altering news to people I'd never met. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by medical texts and half-finished genealogical charts, I felt the full weight of the responsibility I was taking on. This wasn't just a research project. It was a journey into my own past and, potentially, the future of my entire family. The scientist in me was eager to begin, to collect data and analyze results. But the human being, the daughter, the niece, the potential carrier of a deadly genetic legacy, felt a deep sense of trepidation. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the task ahead. Whatever I discovered, whatever truths I unearthed, there would be no going back. The mutation in my genes had set me on this path, and I had no choice but to follow it wherever it might lead. With a mixture of determination and dread, I turned to my computer and began to search for the first threads that would unravel the mystery of my family's genetic fate. The musty scent of old paper filled my nostrils as I sifted through boxes of family records in my parents' attic. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the single window, giving the scene an almost ethereal quality. It felt fitting, somehow, as I dug through the physical remnants of my family's history, searching for clues to our genetic legacy. Birth certificates, death records, old letters. Each document was a piece of a puzzle I was desperately trying to assemble. I'd started with what I knew, tracing my immediate family back 3 generations. But as I delved deeper, the neat branches of my family tree began to splinter and twist in unexpected directions. A yellowed newspaper clipping caught my eye, an obituary for a great-uncle I'd never known existed. The cause of death was listed as complications from a neurological condition. My heart raced as I read the details, recognizing symptoms that aligned all too closely with the disease I now knew ran in our family. This wasn't just a random tragedy. It was another piece of evidence, another victim of our shared genetic flaw. As I continued my research, more secrets began to surface. An aunt, erased from family photos and never spoken of, who'd been institutionalized in her 30s for what was then called hysteria. A cousin, mentioned only in hushed tones, who'd disappeared decades ago after a series of episodes. Each discovery was like a punch to the gut, a stark reminder of the potential fate that awaited not just me, but countless others who shared my blood. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how much had been lost to time and deliberate obfuscation. Entire branches of the family tree had been pruned away, whether through death, distance, or deliberate estrangement. Names that had once been spoken around dinner tables were now nothing more than fading ink on crumbling documents. But among the painful revelations, I found hope as well. A letter from a long-lost great-aunt mentioning relatives who'd moved across the country generations ago. A family Bible with a hastily scribbled address for a second cousin twice removed. These were tenuous connections, fragile threads leading to people who might not even know of their connection to our family. But they were also potential carriers of the gene, unknowing participants in this genetic lottery. As night fell and the attic grew dark, I sat surrounded by the detritus of my family's past, my mind racing. The scientist in me saw the data points, the potential subjects for a comprehensive genetic study. But the human being saw faces, some familiar, some only imagined, of people whose lives could be irrevocably changed by the knowledge I now possessed. The decision crystallized slowly but inexorably. I couldn't just file this information away in some academic paper. I had a responsibility to my family, to science, and to myself. To follow these leads. To find these lost relatives scattered across the country like seeds in the wind. To warn them of the potential time bomb ticking away in their DNA. But as I began to plan my journey, a cold tendril of doubt crept into my mind. How would these strangers react to my sudden appearance in their lives? Would they welcome this knowledge or see it as an unwelcome intrusion? And what right did I have to potentially upend their worlds with this devastating information? I pushed the doubts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. I began to plot out a route, a winding path that would take me to small towns and big cities, to people who shared my blood, but not my name. With each pin placed on the map, I felt the weight of my mission grow heavier. This wasn't just about constructing a family tree anymore. It was about uncovering a shared history, reconnecting severed ties, and potentially saving lives. But it was also about opening old wounds, dredging up long-buried secrets, and forcing people to confront a reality they might prefer to ignore. As I packed my bags, filling them with documents and DNA testing kits, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was embarking on a journey that would change not just my life, but the lives of people I had yet to meet. The road ahead was long and uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls and painful revelations. But I had no choice. The truth in my genes demanded to be heard, and I would be its reluctant messenger. With a mix of determination and trepidation, I locked up the house, my car loaded with the fragments of my family's past and the tools to uncover its future. The open road beckoned, promising answers but also posing questions I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The hum of tires on asphalt became my constant companion as I crisscrossed the country, chasing down leads and long-lost relatives. My car, once just a means of transportation, became a mobile command center, filled with maps, genealogical charts, and a growing collection of DNA samples. My first stop was a small town in Ohio, where a second cousin twice removed owned a hardware store. I'd rehearsed my introduction countless times, but nothing prepared me for the reality of walking into that dusty shop and coming face to face with a stranger who shared my blood. "I am sorry, but I am not interested in any family reunions," he said gruffly, barely looking up from his inventory sheets. I could see the family resemblance in the set of his jaw, the slope of his nose. Did he also carry the gene that could spell his doom? The question burned on my tongue, but I swallowed it back. This wasn't the time or place for such revelations. As I drove away, the sting of rejection was tempered by determination. I knew not every encounter would be easy, but I hadn't expected the wall of indifference I'd hit. I needed to refine my approach, to find a way to make these strangers understand the importance of what I was doing without scaring them off. In a bustling Chicago suburb, I found more success with a distant aunt. She invited me in for coffee, curious about this unexpected family connection. But as I broached the subject of genetic testing, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. "I don't want to know," she said firmly, her hands shaking slightly as she set down her cup. "Some things are better left in God's hands." I left her house with a mix of frustration and understanding. How could I convince people to confront a truth they'd rather ignore? The weight of my knowledge felt like a burden, one I was struggling to share. As the weeks passed, I honed my approach. I learned to lead with empathy rather than science, to share stories of our shared family history before delving into the reason for my visit. Slowly, I began to make progress. A cousin in Florida agreed to be tested. An uncle in Texas shared old family photos that filled in gaps in my research. But it wasn't just DNA samples and medical histories I was collecting. With each encounter, I was piecing together a more complex picture of my family. I heard stories of triumphs and tragedies, of long-held grudges and unexpected acts of kindness. The clinical family tree I'd started with was becoming flesh and blood, filled with real people with hopes, fears, and secrets. In a rundown apartment in Detroit, I met a great aunt who'd been estranged from the family for decades. As she hesitantly shared her story of love deemed unacceptable by her parents, of the child given up for adoption, I began to understand the deep wells of pain that ran through our family history. The genetic mutation I was tracing was just one thread in a complex tapestry of inherited trauma and resilience. Not every encounter ended in agreement to be tested, but each one added to my understanding. I was learning to read between the lines, to see the signs of our shared genetic legacy, even in those who didn't know they carried it. The slight tremor in a hand, the mention of a parent who'd suffered from nerves, each was a potential clue, another piece of the puzzle. As I drove through the night, heading towards my next destination, I found myself reflecting on the journey so far. I'd set out seeking scientific data, a clear lineage of genetic transmission. What I was finding was messier, more human. The disease that had brought me on this quest was just one part of our shared inheritance. We were bound together by more than just DNA. by shared stories, shared sorrows, and the complex web of choices made by generations before us. The road stretched out before me, leading to more unknown relatives and untold stories. I was no longer just a scientist on a mission, but a chronicler of a family's hidden history. With each mile, each conversation, I was uncovering not just the path of a genetic mutation, but the very essence of what it meant to be part of this sprawling, complicated family. As dawn broke over the horizon, I steeled myself for the next encounter. The journey was far from over, and I knew there would be more challenges ahead. But I was no longer the same person who had set out weeks ago, armed only with scientific knowledge and a sense of duty. I was becoming something more, a bridge between past and future, a keeper of secrets and a bearer of difficult truths. The weight of this responsibility settled over me as I drove on towards the next piece of our shared puzzle. Whatever I would find, whatever truths awaited me, I knew that this journey was changing me in ways I had never anticipated. And somewhere, in the complex interplay of genes and stories, I hoped to find not just answers, but a deeper understanding of who we were as a family, bound together by more than just the silent code in our cells. The sterile click of the centrifuge echoed in the small motel room I'd converted into a makeshift lab. Another vial of blood, another potential carrier of our family's genetic curse. This time it belonged to a cousin I'd tracked down in a sun-bleached Arizona town. He'd agreed to the test with a shrug and a wry smile, saying, "Well, we all gotta die of something, right?" His nonchalance was a stark contrast to the fear I'd encountered in others. Just days earlier, I'd sat in a pristine suburban living room, watching an aunt I'd never met before pace nervously as I explained the reason for my visit. "I don't want to know," she'd said, her voice trembling. "If I have it, I have it. Knowing won't change anything." I left her house with an ache in my chest, wondering if I was doing more harm than good. As I logged the latest sample into my database, I couldn't help but reflect on the varied reactions I'd encountered. Some relatives embraced the opportunity for knowledge, viewing the test as a chance to take control of their health. Others recoiled from it, seeing only the potential for devastation. With each interaction, I found myself grappling with the ethics of my mission. Did I have the right to disrupt lives with this information? Was knowledge truly power, or could it be a burden too heavy to bear? The scientist in me argued that data was neutral, that information could save lives. But the human being, the family member, couldn't ignore the pain and fear I was witnessing. These ethical dilemmas plagued me as I continued my journey. In a rainy Seattle cafe, I met a second cousin who worked as a genetic counselor. The irony wasn't lost on either of us as we discussed the implications of my research. "You're opening Pandora's box," she warned me. "Once this information is out there, you can't take it back. Are you prepared for the consequences?" Her words haunted me as I drove through the night, the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers keeping time with my racing thoughts. Was I prepared? The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, heavier with each mile. But it wasn't all ethical quandaries and resistance. In a small town in Maine, I found an uncle who greeted my news with surprising enthusiasm. "I always knew there was something off in our family," he said, rolling up his sleeve for the blood draw. "Maybe now we can do something about it." His optimism was infectious, reminding me of why I'd started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about identifying a genetic mutation. It was about giving people the power to make informed decisions about their health and their futures. As I collected more samples and more stories, a fuller picture of my family began to emerge. In dusty attics and over cups of coffee, I uncovered tales that had been buried for generations. There was the great-grandfather who disappeared during the Depression, leaving behind a young family and a trail of unpaid debts. The aunt who'd been a code breaker during World War II, taking her classified secrets to the grave. Each story added depth and complexity to the clinical family tree it started with. Some of these revelations were fascinating, offering glimpses into a rich family history I'd never known. Others were painful, exposing long-hidden wounds and resentments. In a dimly lit bar in Chicago, a distant cousin revealed the truth about a family scandal that had torn apart an entire branch of our tree. "Maybe now you understand why some of us don't want to dig up the past," he said, his eyes hard as he drained his glass. I began to see that the genetic mutation I was tracing was just one thread in a complex tapestry of inherited traits and shared experiences. We were bound together not just by DNA, but by the choices and secrets of generations past. As I compiled my data, cross-referencing genetic markers with family anecdotes, patterns began to emerge. The mutations seemed to cluster in certain branches of the family, skipping others entirely. But with each new piece of information, new questions arose. Why had some carriers of the gene lived long, healthy lives, while others succumbed early? What environmental factors might be at play? The scientist in me thrilled at these puzzles, eager to unravel the complex interplay of genetics and environment. But the human being, the family member, felt the weight of each revelation. Every data point was a life, a story, a potential tragedy waiting to unfold. As I packed up my makeshift lab, preparing to move on to the next town and the next set of relatives, I found myself at a crossroads. The information I was gathering had the potential to save lives, to prevent suffering, but it also had the power to shatter illusions, to force people to confront truths they might not be ready to face. I stared at the vials of blood, each one containing secrets yet to be revealed. The responsibility was overwhelming, the ethical implications dizzying. But I knew I couldn't stop now. Whatever truths lay hidden in our shared genetic code, whatever stories remained to be uncovered, I was committed to seeing this through to the end. With a mix of determination and trepidation, I loaded my car and set out for the next destination. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but I was driven by a force stronger than scientific curiosity or family obligation. It was a quest for understanding, for connection, for the truth that lay hidden in our very cells. Whatever I would find, whatever consequences awaited, I knew that this journey was changing me and my family in ways I had never anticipated. The email notification chimed, a sound that once heralded mundane work correspondence, but now sent a jolt of anxiety through my system. The first batch of genetic test results had arrived. With trembling fingers, I opened the file, my eyes scanning the data, searching for the telltale markers I'd come to dread. Positive, negative, positive. Each result carried the weight of a life potentially altered forever. As I cross-referenced the codes with my family tree, faces flashed before my eyes. The cousin who joked about dying anyway, the aunt who'd reluctantly agreed after hours of persuasion, the young second cousin just starting her family. How could I possibly convey this information to them? The responsibility crushed down on me like a physical force. I'd initiated this process, convinced of the righteousness of my quest for knowledge. But now, faced with the reality of delivering life-altering news, I felt woefully unprepared. My first call was to the cousin in Arizona. His earlier nonchalance crumbled as I explained the results. "So what you're saying is, I'm fucked?" he asked, his voice cracking. The silence that followed was deafening. What could I possibly say to make this better? Each subsequent conversation left me emotionally drained. I watched through video calls as faces crumpled, heard sobs through phone lines, felt the palpable relief from those who dodged the genetic bullet. The scientist in me tried to maintain professional distance, to view this as data collection. But the human being, the family member, felt each reaction like a blow. As I delivered news to a young couple, both carriers of the gene, about the implications for their future children, I found myself grappling with my own fears. The mutation lurked in my own DNA, a ticking time bomb. How long did I have before symptoms appeared? Would I end up like Great Aunt Eliza, lost in a fog of neurodegeneration? The clinical descriptions I'd read took on new, terrifying significance as I imagined them playing out in my own life. Sleepless nights became the norm. I'd wake in a cold sweat, images of withering neurons and unraveling DNA strands dancing behind my eyelids. The weight of knowledge, once so eagerly sought, now felt like a curse. But amidst the darkness, pinpricks of light began to emerge. An email from the aunt in Seattle, thanking me for the information and expressing a newfound determination to participate in clinical trials. A call from a distant cousin, asking if I knew of others in the family who tested positive. He wanted to reach out, to offer support. These small gestures of connection sparked an idea. If the knowledge was a burden, perhaps it could also be a bridge. I began to reach out to those who tested positive, gauging interest in forming a support group. The response was cautious, but hopeful. Our first video call was awkward, filled with nervous laughter and long silences. But as we shared our fears, our hopes, our anger at the genetic hand we'd been dealt, something shifted. Strangers connected by blood became confidants, united by a shared struggle. As the group grew, so did its purpose. We shared information about emerging treatments, discussed lifestyle changes that might delay onset, and simply provided a space to voice the fears that others couldn't understand. For the first time since embarking on this journey, I felt like I was truly helping, not just delivering devastating news, but the weight of responsibility didn't lift entirely. Each new test result was still a potential bombshell. Each family gathering I attended, now armed with knowledge of who carried the gene, was fraught with unspoken tensions. I found myself watching relatives for signs of early symptoms, my medical knowledge both a blessing and a curse. As I compiled my research, preparing to present my findings to the medical community, I grappled with questions of privacy and consent. How much should I reveal about individual family members? Where was the line between advancing scientific knowledge and protecting personal information? The enormity of what I'd uncovered, not just the genetic legacy, but the web of family secrets and connections, sometimes felt overwhelming. I'd set out to construct a family tree, to trace the path of a mutation. What I had created was a complex tapestry of lives intertwined by more than just DNA. Late one night, as I pored over my data, a message popped up from a member of the support group. "Thank you," it read simply, "for giving us the truth, even when it hurts, for helping us face this together." Those words settled over me, not erasing the weight of responsibility, but somehow making it more bearable. I'd opened Pandora's box, unleashing difficult truths and painful realities. But in doing so, I had also created the possibility for connection, for shared strength in the face of an uncertain future. As I closed my laptop, exhaustion mingling with a tentative sense of purpose, I knew the journey was far from over. There would be more tests, more difficult conversations, more ethical dilemmas to navigate. But for the first time in months, I felt equal to the task. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but it was one I was learning to carry. Not alone, but supported by the very family I'd set out to understand. The idea of a family reunion seemed almost absurd given the circumstances. Yet here I was, standing in a rented hall, watching as faces both familiar and strange filtered through the door. The genetic time bomb ticking away in many of our cells had become the unlikely catalyst for this gathering. As I greeted each arrival, I marveled at the diversity of our family. The cousin from Arizona, his nonchalance now tempered with a quiet determination. The aunt from Seattle, armed with pamphlets on clinical trials. The young couple, their hands intertwined, fear and hope warring in their eyes. Each carried the weight of knowledge it thrust upon them, yet each had chosen to come, to face this together. The air was thick with tension as people who had spoken in years, sometimes decades, came face to face. Old grudges simmered beneath polite smiles. Unresolved conflicts hung in the air like storm clouds. I'd known this reunion would be challenging, but I hadn't anticipated the intensity of emotions that swirled through the room. As I stood to address the group, my carefully prepared speech felt woefully inadequate. How could I possibly encapsulate the journey we'd all been on, the revelations and fears we now shared? I took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces. My family, bound by blood and now by a shared genetic legacy. We're here today because of a mutation, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. A tiny change in our DNA that has shaped our family's history in ways we're only beginning to understand. But we're also here because of something stronger than genetics, our choice to face this together. As I spoke, I saw nods of agreement, tears being wiped away, hands reaching out to comfort neighbors. The shared experience of grappling with our genetic reality had created a bond that transcended old family divisions. But the path to reconciliation wasn't smooth. As the day wore on, old wounds reopened. In a corner, I overheard heated whispers between siblings who hadn't spoken since their father's funeral. The pain of past estrangements, of missed opportunities for connection, bubbled to the surface. Yet, for every moment of tension, there seemed to be a counterbalancing act of healing. I watched in awe as a great-aunt who'd been ostracized decades ago for marrying beneath her station was embraced by the very cousins who'd shunned her. The shared experience of facing our genetic legacy had put old family squabbles into stark perspective. As the day progressed, I found myself stepping back, observing the interactions with a mixture of scientific curiosity and deeply personal investment. Conversations that started with hesitant questions about genetic test results often evolved into deeper discussions of family history, shared memories, and hopes for the future. In a quiet moment, the cousin from Arizona approached me. "You know," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "I was angry when you first told me about the test results. Felt like you'd ruined my life. But being here, seeing all these faces, hearing these stories, I'm not alone in this. That means something." His words hit me hard, encapsulating the unexpected impact of my research. I'd set out to trace a genetic mutation, to understand a medical phenomenon. What it uncovered was so much more. A living, breathing family history with all its complexities and contradictions. As the day wore on, I found myself drawn into conversations that had nothing to do with genetics. I learned about family legends I'd never heard, discovered distant relatives with shared interests, and even found myself laughing at old family jokes that suddenly made sense in this new context. The scientific part of my brain was still whirring, noting patterns of inheritance, observing shared physical traits that might be linked to our genetic legacy. But, for perhaps the first time since I'd embarked on this journey, the human part of me was fully present, reveling in the connections being forged and rebuilt. As the reunion drew to a close, I stood back and observed the scene. People who had arrived as strangers were exchanging contact information, making plans to stay in touch. The support group that had started as a cautious online gathering was now a tangible physical network of care and understanding. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to find my aunt from Seattle. "You've done something remarkable here," she said, her eyes misty. "This isn't just about a disease anymore. You've given us back our family." Her words settled over me, a balm to the doubts and fears that had plagued me throughout this journey. Yes, I'd unleashed difficult truths. Yes, there were still challenges ahead, medical and emotional. But in the process, I'd also facilitated healing, reconnection, and a new sense of shared purpose. As I helped clean up the hall, surrounded by the lingering energy of the day's events, I felt a shift in my perspective. The weight of responsibility I'd been carrying didn't disappear, but it transformed. It was no longer just my burden to bear, but a shared commitment to face whatever came next. Together. The family tree I'd set out to construct had come alive, its branches intertwining in ways I could never have predicted. We were bound not just by a shared genetic legacy, but by the choices we were making now, to support each other, to heal old wounds, to face an uncertain future with collective strength. As I locked up the hall, the last echoes of conversation fading into the night, I realized that this reunion wasn't an endpoint. It was a beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever revelations our shared DNA might still hold, we would face them not as isolated individuals, but as a family, complex, flawed, but ultimately united. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation as I approached the podium. Faces both familiar and unknown looked up at me expectantly. Colleagues, researchers, and even a few family members who'd chosen to attend. The weight of the past months, of all I had discovered and all we had endured as a family, seemed to press down on my shoulders as I adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "What I'm about to present isn't just a scientific discovery. It's a family history, a genetic legacy, and potentially a roadmap for future treatment of neurodegenerative disorders." As I delved into the data, explaining the unique genetic markers we'd identified and the patterns of inheritance we'd observed, I couldn't help but see beyond the clinical facts. Each data point represented a face, a story, a life irrevocably changed by the knowledge I'd uncovered. I spoke of the mutations prevalence in certain branches of the family tree, of the environmental factors that seemed to influence its expression. But I also spoke of resilience, of the strength I'd witnessed in those facing an uncertain future, of the bonds that had formed in the face of shared adversity. The reaction from the scientific community was immediate and enthusiastic. Questions flew from all corners of the room, about potential treatment pathways, about genetic counseling implications, about the ethical considerations of such comprehensive family studies. But it was the response from my family members in attendance that truly moved me. I saw pride in their eyes, a sense of purpose in their posture. WED turned our private struggle into a beacon of hope for others facing similar genetic challenges. As the conference wound down, I found myself in conversation with researchers eager to collaborate, to build upon the foundation we'd laid. The potential for new treatments, for early interventions, for a future where our genetic legacy didn't have to be a death sentence. It was all suddenly within reach. In the quiet of my hotel room that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. I'd set out to construct a family tree, to trace the path of a mutation. What I had created was so much more, a living, breathing network of support and shared purpose. The family that had once been fragmented, separated by old grudges and unspoken secrets, now stood united. Our shared genetic burden had become a source of strength, a catalyst for healing wounds long thought beyond repair. I thought of the cousin who'd initially reacted with anger to his test results, now leading support group meetings with compassion and insight. Of the aunt who'd feared knowledge, now advocating fiercely for increased research funding. Of the young couple, facing their genetic legacy with courage, determined to break the cycle for future generations. As I updated our family tree, no longer just a clinical document but a testament to our shared journey, I marveled at the transformation. Branches that had once been bare now flourished with new connections. The genetic mutation that wound through our shared DNA was no longer just a harbinger of doom, but a thread that bound us together in ways we were only beginning to understand. Looking towards the future, I felt a cautious optimism bloom. Yes, the challenges ahead were daunting. The specter of the disease still loomed large for many of us. But we would face it together, armed with knowledge, supported by a network of love and understanding that spanned generations. The vibration of my phone pulled me from my reverie. A message from the family group chat, filled with congratulations on the presentation and plans for our next gathering. As I scrolled through the messages, each name now carrying the weight of a fully realized story, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. This journey had changed me in ways I was still discovering. The scientist in me had gained invaluable insights, data that could shape the future of genetic research. But the human being, the family member, had gained something even more precious, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of being part of something larger than myself. As I packed my bags, ready to return home into the next phase of our shared journey, I realized that the end of this chapter was really just the beginning. Whatever the future held, breakthroughs or setbacks, triumphs or trials, we would face it not as isolated individuals, but as a family. Our genetic legacy, once a source of fear and division, had become the foundation for a new kind of inheritance. One of resilience, of compassion, of the unbreakable bonds of shared experience. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, that uncertainty didn't fill me with dread. Instead, I felt a quiet determination, a readiness to face whatever came next. Because now I knew we were in this together, our fates intertwined not just by the quirks of DNA, but by the choices we'd made and the connections we'd forged. As I closed my laptop, the updated family tree glowing on the screen, I allowed myself a moment of peace. Whatever the future held, we would write the next chapters of our family history together. A story of hope, of resilience, and of the enduring power of human connection in the face of even the most daunting genetic odds.
Hey there, Unraveling Ties family. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I hope it touched your heart, made you think, or even inspired you in some way. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this story. Don't be shy. Leave a comment below and share your perspective with our community. Your voice matters to us. If you enjoyed today's story and want to be a part of our journey as we unravel the complexities of human relationships, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss a new story. We're always eager to explore new angles and dive into the themes that resonate with you the most. So tell us, what kind of stories would you like to see in upcoming episodes? Your input helps us create content that you'll love. And hey, if today's story reminded you of a personal experience or a tale you'd like to share, we're all ears. Feel free to share your own stories in the comments. Who knows, your story might even inspire a future Unraveling Ties episode. Once again, thank you for being a part of the Unraveling Ties family. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Until next time, keep embracing the ties that bind us and never stop exploring the depths of the human heart. See you in the next video.